I wasn't always a man who lived alone in silence. Once, the laughter of my daughter used to echo down the halls of this house. I built it with my hands, each brick laid not just with mortar, but with memories. I remember Celeste when she was just a girl, running barefoot through the garden, trailing ribbons behind her. Isabel calling after her from the porch with a warm smile and a cup of tea in hand. Those were the years when love was simple and life had meaning stitched into every sunrise. But life, in its cruel efficiency, knows how to take those things away slowly, 1 inch at a time. When Isabel passed, the silence became unbearable. I didn't know what to do with myself without her. She had been my compass. After she was gone, I wandered through my own home like a guest who'd overstayed his welcome. Celeste, bless her heart at the time, tried to help. She called more often. She brought Blake around, her new fiancé back then. They smiled and said the right things, offered to help me sort through paperwork, talked about updating the kitchen, installing smart locks. I didn't think much of it then. It felt like care, maybe a bit of modern enthusiasm. I let them in. I let them help. That was my first mistake. I began handing over small responsibilities to Celeste, managing bills, renewing property taxes, checking in on insurance policies. She insisted, said it was easier, said I shouldn't have to worry about those things anymore. You should just enjoy your time, Dad, she said. Let us help carry the load. And so I did. I wanted to believe that she meant it, that it was love, not calculation. Blake took an interest in the house itself. This place is beautiful, Elias, he said once, running his hand along the banister I'd varnished myself nearly 20 years ago. Too big for one person, though. Have you thought about selling? I laughed it off then. I'm not dead yet, son. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I should have noticed that. I should have paid more attention to those smiles that didn't warm. But grief clouds judgment. You start to confuse kindness with guilt. You want to believe people mean well, especially your own blood. Celeste brought meals sometimes, told me stories about their new apartment, their financial struggles, their dreams of a family home. I listened, nodded, and encouraged her. I even gave her some money for their wedding. Told her Isabel would have been proud. I didn't know I was setting the stage for my own replacement. The house began to change, quietly, subtly. First, they offered to repaint the guest room. Then they had movers bring in a few boxes just for storage. Blake had a desk delivered. Celeste began leaving clothes in the master closet. It was all framed as temporary, helpful, practical. But piece by piece, they were rearranging the world I once knew. And I, too tired to argue, let them. Some nights I'd sit in the den, watching old tapes of Isabel playing the piano. Her fingers were never graceful, but her joy, her presence, lit up the room. I'd pause the tape on her smile sometimes, needing to see it again, just to remember what warmth looked like. I missed her terribly. I wondered what she would have said if she were here. Would she have spoken up? Would she have told me I was being naive? Celeste began spending more nights at the house. Then, full weeks. She claimed it was to help me cope. I think deep down I wanted the company, even if it felt strange. Even if she was always too quick to correct me when I used my in front of the word house. My house is getting drafty again, I said once, chuckling as I rubbed my knee. She looked up from her phone and replied, Dad, it's not just your house anymore. We're a family now. Something about the way she said it chilled me. Not the words, but the ownership in her voice. Still, I stayed quiet. I told myself I was imagining things, that grief was twisting my perception, that I was lucky to have my daughter so close to be taken care of in my old age, that I shouldn't complain. And so I sacrificed. I gave space. I gave trust. I gave the benefit of the doubt, over and over again. That's the thing no one tells you about betrayal. It doesn't come with a bang. It arrives slowly, disguised as love, and I welcomed it through the front door. It started with a drawer. Just one. Celeste asked if she could use the drawer in the hallway cabinet for a few things, some envelopes, a couple of candles, and vitamins she liked to keep handy. I didn't blink. Of course, I said. It's a drawer, not a demargaridon of war. But then the drawer turned into the entire cabinet, the cabinet into the linen closet. And soon enough, I was asking where my own towels had gone. Dad, you barely use this stuff, she said, laughing. It just makes sense for us to reorganize. Us, that word again. I nodded like I always did. I told myself I was making space, that I was being accommodating, that this was what family was about, adjustment. But every small thing they took made the house feel a little less like mine. My routines were slowly unspooled. Blake started using the garage for his work tools. He was trying to start a landscaping side hustle, he said. That meant parking in the driveway, even when it rained. Once, I asked, only half-jokingly, if I should start asking permission to use my own coffee maker. Celeste didn't laugh. They started making decisions without even running them by me. I came home one afternoon from a walk to find new curtains hanging in the living room, Isabel's floral ones stuffed in a bag by the back door. They were dusty and dated, Celeste said, waving off my discomfort. We're just modernizing a bit. You'll love it. But I didn't love it. Those curtains weren't just fabric. They were pieces of memory. I remembered the day Isabel picked them out. The sun had come through those yellow petals every spring for 20 years. I stood there holding the bag, nodding, but I felt something cave in my chest that I didn't know how to name. The changes kept coming. A smart thermostat, a new rug, a different dining table because ours didn't seat enough for guests. Whose guests? Celeste began inviting Blake's parents over, then friends. Small dinners at first, then casual gatherings that grew into weekend barbecues. I'd get vague heads-ups. We'll have a few people over tonight, Dad. Don't worry, we'll keep it down. Sometimes I wasn't even told. I'd walk into my own kitchen to find strangers helping themselves to wine I didn't know we had. And gradually, my presence began to feel like a background detail. I started staying in my room more, not because I was tired, but because it was the only place left that still felt untouched. Even then, they knocked less. Sometimes, not at all. Blake once barged in holding a package addressed to me. Sorry, thought this was mine, he said, tossing it on my bed like I wasn't sitting there. That was when I started to realize they didn't see me as the owner anymore. Maybe not even as a parent. I was becoming a relic, an old man they had to work around while building their perfect life inside my walls. And yet, I kept letting it happen. Why? Because I didn't want to believe the worst. Because I loved Celeste. Because part of me hoped that if I stayed quiet long enough, things would go back to how they used to be. But things don't go backward. One evening I made dinner, an old recipe Isabel used to love: rosemary chicken, wild rice, lemon-glazed carrots. I set the table, waited. When they came home, they looked surprised. Oh, Celeste said, we already ate. No apology, no explanation. I ate alone that night, scraping the food into silence. I kept the lights dim. I think I needed the shadows to keep me company. It was after that night that Victor came by, my old friend. We hadn't spoken much in years. Life does that to friendships. But he was in town, and we went for coffee. I told him bits and pieces of what had been happening. Not everything, just enough. He didn't say much at first, but before we parted, he looked me square in the eye and said, Elias, there's a difference between love and convenience. You've got to ask yourself which one they're really offering. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering when exactly the shift had happened. When had I gone from father to footnote? Was it when Isabel died? Was it when I handed over the bills? Or was it simply when I stopped insisting on being seen? The next morning, I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back. Not because he was old, but because he looked so resigned. And I promised myself something quietly, without fanfare. This was the last time I would trade my dignity for peace. It wasn't just the objects they moved or the closets they rearranged. It has the energy. The air itself felt different. The house that once echoed with the quiet comfort of my own footsteps now pulsed with a rhythm I didn't recognize. Music I wouldn't choose, voices I didn't know, rules I hadn't agreed to. And yet, I stayed quiet, walking around like I needed permission to be there. In my own home. They had even installed a smart lock, one of those digital keypads with app integration. At first, I thought it was a safety upgrade. But then Blake forgot to give me the new code after he changed it. I stood outside that afternoon with a grocery bag in each hand, trying to balance them while calling Celeste. No answer. I waited almost 30 minutes before Blake strolled up the driveway and tapped in the code with a smirk. We didn't think you'd be out so long, he said. No apology, just that smug grin. That night, I wrote the new code down on a sticky note and tucked it in my wallet. That's when it hit me. I, Elias Marchand, had to write down the code to enter the house I bought with 30 years of savings and a lifetime of work. The same house where I held my wife as she passed, where I painted the nursery, where I scraped frost off the windows with a butter knife in '91 because we couldn't afford new insulation. Now I needed permission to come inside. The kitchen, once my sanctuary, became a shared zone I had to tiptoe through. I started eating less, not out of diet or appetite, but out of discomfort. Every time I stood at the counter, I felt like I was in someone else's way. Blake had turned it into his protein shake lab. His smoothie blenders lined up like trophies. Celeste reorganized the pantry. My favorite teas vanished. The kettle I liked disappeared. When I asked about it, she said, "Oh, it was old and leaky. We got a better one." No one thought to ask me. It wasn't just the things they changed. It was the feeling. The weight in the room when I entered, the silence after my jokes, the way conversations seemed to end when I sat down. I'd watch from the hallway as they curled up on the couch, whispering, laughing. I stopped going into the living room after a while. I'd only sit there if they weren't home. One evening, I came downstairs to grab a book and caught the tail end of something that still rings in my ears. Blake was speaking. He's just always around, like a ghost that won't leave. Celeste didn't respond. She didn't have to. Her silence was agreement. I stood frozen just outside the doorway, the book forgotten. I backed away quietly, climbed the stairs slowly, and closed my door without a sound. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and thought, maybe I am a ghost. From then on, I started moving differently. Softer steps, shorter conversations. I began avoiding the kitchen during their mealtimes. I waited until they left for work to sit in the living room. I even started using the downstairs bathroom because Blake complained that I was always in the upstairs one when he needed it. I was shrinking inside a home that used to stretch with memories. Victor called a few days later. He said he was passing through town again, and I nearly leapt at the chance to meet. Over coffee, I told him everything this time, every detail. I didn't sugarcoat it like before. He listened, patient as always. Then he leaned forward and said, "You're not a guest in your house, Elias. You're a prisoner on parole. And the saddest part is, you built the prison yourself by staying quiet." His words burned, because they were true. I had been waiting for a sign to act, for things to magically return to normal. But normal had packed its bags a long time ago. And now I was the one stuck in limbo, drifting through hallways like a trespasser. When I got home that evening, Celeste was on the phone in the backyard and Blake was watching TV. Neither acknowledged me. I walked up the stairs slowly, one hand grazing the wooden banister I'd sanded and stained myself 2 decades ago. In my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and whispered to myself, "This ends soon." I didn't know how yet. But I knew one thing for sure. Living like this was no longer an option. Conversations that fell silent the second I entered the room. At first, I told myself I was imagining things, that the stress of adapting to a new rhythm, a new shared space, was just playing tricks on me. But the silence began to feel calculated. The warmth between us thinned, replaced by a kind of tension that thickened the air like fog. Celeste was always busy now. Too busy for our tea chats in the morning. Too busy for the crossword puzzles we used to do together on Sundays. I'd walk into the kitchen and she'd gather her phone and leave, not in a hurry, but deliberately. As if my presence rewrote her schedule. Blake, on the other hand, had become a shadow that loomed large. He wouldn't say much, but when he did, it was laced with subtle condescension, small reminders that I was in their space. Their house, their life. Not ours, not mine. I began to notice how many decisions were being made without me. A new couch arrived. A bedroom was converted into a home office. My old record collection vanished from the living room shelves and was replaced by minimalist art that looked like someone had spilled printer ink and called it modern. When I asked about the records, Celeste shrugged. "They're in storage. Blake says it feels more open this way." Open? The house had never felt so closed off. One Saturday, I found myself locked out again. Not by accident. No, this time the smart lock app had been updated and I wasn't on the approved list anymore. I stood there on the porch holding a paper bag of apples I had picked up from the farmer's market. I knocked. No answer. Rang the bell. Still nothing. After 20 minutes, Blake opened the door with one hand still holding his video game controller. "You should have told us you were stepping out," he said flatly, like I was a teenager who broke curfew. That night, something shifted in me. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared out the window, remembering the early years of the house, the scraped knees in the backyard, the snowmen Isabel and I helped Celeste build, the Thanksgiving where we forgot the stuffing but laughed so hard we cried. Now I felt like a relic, not just old, but irrelevant. A memory no one had asked for. Celeste started leaving brochures around the house, subtle ones at first, about retirement communities, assisted living with dignity, brochures that showed smiling seniors in communal gardens, playing cards, or sipping lemonade on patios. I found one tucked inside the newspaper I hadn't even asked for. Another was accidentally left in my bathroom drawer. I didn't confront her. I just collected them all and kept them in a drawer of my own, not out of spite, but to remind myself that I wasn't paranoid. This was deliberate. Then came the whispering phone calls. Late at night, I could hear her voice through the walls, hushed and sharp, saying things like, "He's just not adapting," or "It's taking a toll on us." She never said my name, but she didn't have to. I was the only one in this house with nowhere else to go, and she knew it. The most painful part wasn't the isolation. It wasn't the subtle jabs or the missing tea or the ghost-like way I was being erased from the day-to-day rhythm of the home. It was watching Celeste, my daughter, become someone I didn't recognize. Someone who looked at me and saw an obligation, not a man, not her father. Not the one who stayed up with her through every fever, who patched scraped elbows, who held her hand when Isabel passed away and she collapsed in my arms, screaming from a pain words could never fix. Now she barely looked at me at all. One afternoon, I stepped into the kitchen and found Blake on the phone, laughing. He noticed me and turned his back, whispering something that ended in, "I know, right? He's just always around." The way he said it, like I was a piece of bad furniture they hadn't figured out how to throw away, carved through me sharper than any insult. I walked out without a word. But I didn't go back upstairs. I walked straight out the front door, down the street, and didn't stop until I hit the corner park bench near Elm Street. I sat there for hours, the wind brushing over my skin like a quiet reminder that I still existed. When I finally returned home, the house looked the same. But it no longer felt like a home. Not even like a house. It was something else now. A stage I was being written off of slowly but surely. But I wasn't going to wait for the final act. I had been patient. I had stayed silent. I had given more than I ever received, and in return I was being erased in plain sight. But what they didn't know, what they had forgotten, was that this story was still mine, and I was about to take the pen back. It was Celeste's birthday weekend. I overheard her telling Blake on the phone, "It's going to be intimate, just a few friends, nothing big." I didn't think anything of it at first. After all, I'd always been part of her birthdays. Even as an adult, she used to ask me to light the candles or give the toast. So when Saturday came around, and I noticed the dining room set with wine glasses and fancy cutlery, I naturally assumed I'd be included. I even shaved, put on a crisp shirt, and wrapped a book I'd saved to gift her. A poetry collection Isabel once read to her when she was young. I thought it might touch her. But hours passed. Music played downstairs, laughter echoed through the walls, and no one came to get me. When I stepped out into the hallway, I heard someone say, "Just pretend he's not here." That's when I knew. I wasn't meant to be part of it. I stood there for a long moment, the wrapped book still in my hand. Then I turned, walked back into my room and closed the door. Not angrily, just quietly, with a kind of aching grace. I placed the gift on my bedside table and sat down slowly, listening to the distant hum of celebration that excluded me completely. Later, when I went to the kitchen to get some water, the dishes had already been cleared. Not a slice of cake left. I opened the fridge to find my leftovers pushed to the back. A single note was taped to the counter. "Didn't think you'd want to join, figured you needed rest." No name, no apology, no warmth. That night, I didn't cry. I just lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above me. There was a different kind of heartbreak in being forgotten. Not hated, not scolded. Just erased. The next morning, the trash bin was full of wine bottles, party napkins, and a half-deflated balloon tangled around a fork. I picked it all up. Not because I had to, but because I always had. I was still trying to be part of a house that had already decided it had no room for me. Blake walked in as I was taking the bin out. He paused and said, "Oh, you're up early." That was it. No thanks. No acknowledgement. Just another subtle reminder that my presence was a background detail. A few days later, I overheard Celeste talking to her friend on speakerphone. She said, "It's like he's there, but not really, like living with a ghost." And the friend laughed. My daughter laughed too. I didn't make a sound, but something inside me cracked. That phrase again. Ghost. Always that word, as if I had become transparent in the place I had built. A man whose presence lingered without permission. Victor called me that evening as if he sensed something was wrong. I didn't say much, just that the weather had been cold and the house felt colder. He sighed, long and heavy. "Elias, when you stop getting invited into your own life, maybe it's time to start writing a new one." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. That single sentence hung with me for days. I thought about all the choices I'd made, the silences I'd kept, the boundaries I hadn't drawn. I thought about how often I'd bent myself to make everyone else comfortable, while slowly erasing my own dignity in the process. Celeste used to draw little pictures on napkins when she was young, stick figures of us holding hands, a house with a heart above it. I found one the other day wedged between old photo albums in the hallway cabinet. The ink had faded, but the memory hadn't. I stared at it for a long time, feeling something deep inside stir. Not sadness, something stronger. A pull. A reminder. This house wasn't just a structure of bricks and beams. It was years of love, loss, sacrifice, and memory. I had laid the floors with my own hands, painted the walls with Isabel while Celeste napped in a crib. I wasn't a guest here. I wasn't an intruder, but they had made me feel like one for too long. So I started to move differently. I woke up earlier, stopped tiptoeing, sat at the kitchen table, whether they were there or not. I didn't ask for space anymore. I took it. Celeste noticed, so did Blake. The discomfort in their eyes was subtle, but real. One morning I came down in a button-up and slacks, holding my coffee like I used to. Blake raised an eyebrow. "Got a meeting today?" I smiled. "No, just felt like being present." He didn't respond. He just left his smoothie unfinished on the counter and walked out. But I wasn't looking for a response. I was reclaiming something they had tried to take from me. And this time, I wasn't going to ask for it back. It happened on a Sunday morning. I was making coffee, savoring the quiet before the day began, when Blake came into the kitchen with that tone in his voice, the kind that didn't ask, it informed. "Hey Elias, we're going to need the upstairs bathroom cleared out today. Celeste's cousin is coming to stay for a week, and it'll be easier if she has her own space." At first, I thought he was joking. The upstairs bathroom had been mine for years. My toiletries, my towel rack, my shaving kit. It wasn't just a bathroom. It was one of the last private spaces I had in the house. I let out a small laugh, expecting him to realize how absurd it sounded. But he didn't smile. "Seriously?" I asked, my voice caught between disbelief and anger. "Yeah," he said casually, pouring almond milk into his smoothie. "It's just for a week. You can use the downstairs one. It'll be fine." The way he said it'll be fine was the same way someone tells a child they can play with a different toy. Like I was expected to accept it without question. And in this house, a week often meant until we say otherwise. Before I could even respond, Celeste walked in, kissed Blake on the cheek, and said, "Oh, Dad, I forgot to tell you. We promised the room to Lily. She's bringing her dog, so please keep the downstairs doors closed so it doesn't run into your room." My room. The one I paid for. The one my name was on the deed for. And now I was being told to close my own doors to accommodate someone who didn't even live here yet. I didn't argue. I didn't slam my coffee down. I just nodded and walked out of the kitchen. But something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger like before. This was something colder. Something sharper. By noon, I'd moved my toothbrush and razor downstairs. I did it quietly, without giving them the satisfaction of seeing me upset. But in my mind, a clock had started ticking. There was no going back to how things had been. Later that day, I overheard them in the living room. Blake was laughing. He took it better than I expected. Celeste replied, "Well, Dad's always been easygoing. He just needs a little push sometimes." A little push. That's what they called stripping me of another space in my own home. I thought about all the pushes I'd taken without protest, the smart lock code I wasn't given, the kitchen reorganized without a word, the birthday party I wasn't invited to, the quiet conversations that ended when I entered the room. None of these were little. They were pieces of me being chipped away, one by one, until there'd be nothing left. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the folder in my nightstand. Inside was the house deed, my will, bank statements. Everything I'd worked for, everything they assumed would be theirs one day. And for the first time, I realized they didn't deserve any of it. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual and went for a walk before they were up. The air was crisp, and with every step, I felt lighter. I passed the park where Celeste had learned to ride her bike, the hardware store where Isabel and I had bought our first tools to start fixing up the house. By the time I returned, the decision was made. Victor called that afternoon, and I didn't waste time. "I'm done," I told him. "Done waiting, done hoping they'll respect me. I need to take action." He didn't ask what I meant. He just said, "Then make sure it's action they never see coming." I knew exactly what he meant. That evening, Celeste knocked on my door, smiling like nothing was wrong. "Dad, Lily will be here Friday, so we'll move your stuff out of the upstairs bathroom tomorrow." I smiled back, calm and polite. "Don't worry about it. I've already moved it." She blinked, caught off guard. "Oh, that was quick." I met her gaze and said, "Sometimes it's better to be ahead of the curve." She thought I was talking about toothbrushes and towels, but I wasn't. I was talking about the plan already taking shape in my mind. A plan that would ensure I'd never be treated like an unwanted guest in my own home again. I didn't tell them I was leaving. I didn't leave a note on the fridge or an announcement at the dinner table. I'd learned something in the months of being sidelined in my own home. Silence is power. Words give people time to react, to argue, to twist the situation in their favor. Silence leaves them blind until it's too late. The plan started with the small things. I began taking a few personal items to Victor's garage under the guise of helping him clear out space. A box of old tools here, a stack of framed photos there. Nothing they'd notice missing in the short term. My mother's quilt, folded neatly into a duffel bag. Isabel's recipe cards tucked between the pages of a book. My wedding ring in its velvet case, placed carefully inside my jacket pocket. Every trip to Victor's meant one less piece of my life for them to claim when I was gone. At the same time, I started doing my homework. I researched small apartments in nearby towns, places far enough to be out of their daily reach, but close enough for me to keep tabs if I ever wanted to. I found one that was perfect. A modest one-bedroom above a quiet bookstore, with sunlight that poured through the windows in the morning and rent that wouldn't drain my savings. The landlord, an older man named Harold, asked no prying questions. "First month, last month, security deposit," he said. I handed him the cash that very day. Back at the house, I moved through the rooms with a new kind of calm. The anger I'd felt had been replaced by something steadier, resolve. Celeste and Blake still talked over me at dinner, still left me out of conversations, but it no longer mattered. I was already gone in my mind. One evening, as Blake droned on about a new investment he wanted to make, I sat back and looked around the table. The two of them, so confident, so sure they were steering the ship. I almost laughed. They didn't realize they were about to walk into a storm they couldn't control. "What's funny, Dad?" Celeste asked. I shook my head. "Just remembering something from years ago," I said. And it was true. I was remembering the day I signed the papers for this house, the ink still drying as Isabel and I held hands and imagined our future. A future they had no right to dismantle. The night before my move, I packed the last of my essentials in silence. My clothes, my laptop, the small wooden box where I kept my personal documents. I stood in the doorway of my bedroom, taking one final look at the walls I'd painted myself, the floorboards I'd refinished by hand. This wasn't just a room. It was decades of my life pressed into wood and paint and air. And tomorrow, it would belong to someone else. Or at least, it would no longer belong to me. I left before sunrise. My truck was already loaded with the boxes from Victor's garage, stacked neatly in the back. I moved like a shadow through the house, careful not to wake them. No slamming doors, no creaking floorboards. I didn't even glance into their bedroom as I passed. The front door clicked shut behind me, the sound final, almost ceremonial. Driving away, the streets felt different, lighter, freer. I passed the bakery where Isabel used to buy fresh bread on Sundays, the park where we'd taken Celeste as a toddler, the coffee shop where I'd sit on rainy afternoons with a book. These places used to hold me in a kind of emotional gravity. But now, it felt like I was breaking free of orbit. By the time I pulled up to my new apartment, Harold was waiting with the keys. "You travel light," he said, looking at my truck. I smiled. "You'd be surprised how much you can live without." He handed me the keys and wished me luck, and I stepped into my new home. The scent of fresh paint hit me first, followed by the warmth of sunlight spilling through the tall windows. It wasn't much, just a small kitchen, a living area, a single bedroom, but it was mine. Every square foot, mine. I spent the rest of the morning unpacking, setting up the essentials. Isabel's quilt went on the bed. The recipe cards found a place in the kitchen drawer. My mother's clock, the one that had ticked steadily in my childhood home, sat on the shelf by the window. These weren't just objects. They were anchors, reminders of the life I'd built long before Celeste and Blake decided to edge me out of it. When I finally sat down with a cup of coffee, the quiet felt different. It wasn't the tense, waiting for the other shoe to drop kind of quiet I'd grown used to in my old house. This was peace. No footsteps overhead, no doors slamming, no voices speaking in low tones about what to take from me next. That evening, Victor came by with a grin. "So this is the new headquarters?" he said, looking around. "This is freedom," I replied. He helped me set up a few more things, and before he left, he clapped a hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing, Elias. Now make sure they know it." I didn't answer right away. I just looked out the window at the setting sun, the golden light washing over the street below. "Oh, they'll know," I said finally. "Just not yet." Because leaving was only step one. The real message was still to come. Freedom tasted good, but it also came with a responsibility to protect what was mine from anyone who thought they could take it. I'd left the house physically, but legally, my name still had the final say over it, and that was the part Celeste and Blake didn't understand. They thought leaving me out of conversations gave them control. But in the language of property law, their voices meant nothing. A week after I moved into my apartment, I sat at my small kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a manila folder I'd kept locked in a filing cabinet for over 20 years. It contained the original deed to the house, purchase records, mortgage payoff confirmations, and a few documents Isabel insisted we keep just in case. Back then, I didn't see the point of hoarding so much paper. Now, I silently thanked her for every single page. I'd read the deed before, but this time I studied it like it was a map to buried treasure. My name was there in bold print. Elias Marchand, sole owner. No co-signers, no secondary claimants, no liens. The kind of clean title most homeowners would envy. I ran my finger over the embossed seal from the county clerk's office, remembering the day we signed it. Isabel had insisted on celebrating afterward with champagne, even though we had no furniture yet. We'd sat on the floor of the empty living room, toasting to a home that would never be taken from us. I thought about those words now and felt a slow, deliberate fire building in my chest. I couldn't stop them from disrespecting me under my own roof, but I could make sure they never got their hands on it. That's when I called my old friend Martin Leduc, a retired real estate attorney I'd worked alongside during a construction project years ago. He still owed me a favor. "Elias," he said warmly when he picked up, "you don't usually call unless you need something with screws or nails. What's up?" "I need to make sure my property stays out of certain hands," I told him. "Family hands?" he asked knowingly. "Exactly," I said. He chuckled. "Say no more. I've seen it 100 times. Kids start circling when they smell equity." His voice turned serious. "Tell me what you want." "I want the house sold, fast, but I also want every step airtight, so there's no way they can reverse it, contest it, or claim they didn't know." Martin paused, then said, "That means cash buyers, clean contracts, and no contact with the other parties. You in a hurry?" "I want it done before they even know what's happening," I said. That's when he explained the beauty of a quiet sale, moving a property through a private network of buyers without ever hitting the public market. "You'll get slightly less than top dollar," he warned, "but what you lose in price, you gain in speed, and discretion. I didn't care about losing a small percentage. This wasn't about squeezing every last dollar from the place. This was about making sure the signatures on the closing paperwork were mine and mine alone. Within 2 days, Martin called back. Got someone. They'll pay cash, close in 10 business days. They've bought half a dozen properties like yours in the last year. They keep their mouths shut and their money ready. He told me the offer, still high enough to make Celeste and Blake's imagined payday look like pocket change. I didn't even hesitate. Let's do it, I said. The following morning, I met Martin at his small office, the kind of place that didn't need to impress clients because results spoke louder than decor. He slid the preliminary contract across the table. Read every word, he said, but I've already gone over it. Everything is standard. Clean title transfer, no contingencies, cash deposit wired immediately after inspection. I scanned the pages, my old habit from years of reviewing construction contracts kicking in. The buyer's attorney was listed, along with the escrow account information. It was all legitimate. I signed, feeling the weight of the pen like I was chiseling my decision into stone. Martin leaned back in his chair. You realize, once this is done, they can't touch it, right? They can yell, threaten, cry, whatever, but legally, it'll be as if they never existed in connection to that property. That's the point, I said. The inspection happened the very next day. The buyer's rep walked through the house with the kind of respectful curiosity you rarely see anymore, commenting on the craftsmanship, the care in the details. They didn't know or care about the personal history in the walls. They saw value, not sentiment, and for the first time, that was exactly what I wanted. As I stood there during the walkthrough, my phone buzzed. It was Celeste, probably calling to ask if I could watch their dog or pick up groceries like I had nothing better to do. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message, her voice chipper in a way that made my skin crawl. Hey, Dad, we're thinking of making some changes to the house. Call me back when you can. I almost laughed out loud. In a week, it wouldn't be her house to change. By Friday, the deal was locked in. The buyer wired the deposit, the closing date was set, and I had my final number in writing. It wasn't just a financial figure, it was freedom distilled into a bank transfer. And the best part? Not a whisper of it had reached Celeste or Blake. I left Martin's office that day with the signed documents in a folder under my arm. Walking out into the crisp air, I felt taller, lighter. The deed that had once been a weight I feared they'd take from me was now the very weapon that would keep them empty-handed. I knew the day would come when they'd learn the truth, when they'd stand in a kitchen that no longer belonged to them, holding the realization that the man they thought was beaten still had fight in him. And when that day came, they'd understand, ownership isn't about who lives in the house. It's about who has the power to lock the door behind them. The morning of the closing felt different. The air was sharp, the kind that wakes you up before the coffee does. I dressed in the navy suit Isabel had picked out for our 25th anniversary, the one she'd said made me look like a man who means business. Today, I did. I wasn't walking into that title office as a confused old man shuffling papers I didn't understand. I was walking in as the sole owner of a property about to disappear from Celeste and Blake's reach forever. Martin met me at the office entrance, his briefcase in one hand, a coffee in the other. All set? He asked, scanning my face like he was checking for hesitation. More than ready, I said. We stepped into the closing room, where the buyer's attorney and the escrow officer were already seated. The table was covered in neat stacks of paperwork, pens arranged like surgical instruments. No wasted motions here, just precision and finality. The escrow officer, a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, walked us through every document. Title transfer, deed of sale, settlement statement, wire transfer instructions. Each page got my full attention, and each signature felt like I was cutting another tie, snipping every rope Celeste and Blake thought they had wrapped around me. When the last pen stroke dried, the escrow officer smiled politely. Congratulations, Mr. Marchand. The wire will be in your account within the hour. Those words carried more weight than she could know. It wasn't just money being transferred. It was control. My control, back in my hands where it belonged. After we shook hands all around, Martin and I stepped outside into the bright mid-morning sun. That's it, he said. They can't touch it. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. I thanked him, genuinely. Then I drove not to my apartment, but to the house one last time, not as its owner, but as the man who had orchestrated its exit from their future. It was quiet when I pulled into the driveway. Blake's car wasn't there, and neither was Celeste's. Perfect. I let myself in using the key I still had, the one that wouldn't matter in 24 hours. The rooms were exactly as I remembered, but they felt different. Detached. Like the house already knew it belonged to someone else. I walked through slowly, taking in every corner, every surface I had built, repaired, or refinished. The banister I'd sanded until it gleamed, the crown molding I'd installed by hand, the bay window Isabel had loved so much. Soon, these details would be part of someone else's story. I went into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, leaning against the counter as I thought about how this would play out. They'd come home probably next week, expecting everything to be as it was. They'd unlock the door, maybe notice a few things missing. Then the papers would arrive, official, final, explaining that their names were nowhere in the picture, and that the man they'd called a burden had sold the one thing they thought was theirs. The thought made me smile, but it wasn't a cruel smile. This wasn't about revenge for the sake of revenge. It was about balance. About making sure the years I'd spent working for this house weren't erased by entitlement and arrogance. My phone buzzed. It was a message from the bank confirming the incoming wire. I opened it and stared at the numbers. Nearly $900,000. More than enough to live out my days without ever depending on anyone who saw me as a problem to be solved. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and took one last slow walk through the living room, the hallway, the bedroom that had been mine and Isabel's. By the time I left, I had everything I needed. My memories, my freedom, and my future. The house itself was just wood, nails, and paint now. Its emotional weight was gone. That evening I sat in my apartment with a notepad, sketching out the next phase. I'd already moved what mattered most, Isabel's jewelry box, our wedding photos, and important documents. The rest would be cleared out by the moving company I'd arranged, their bill already paid in full. Celeste and Blake's things would be placed in a storage unit under their name, with a 30-day clock before fees kicked in. I'd make sure they got the address. After all, I wasn't cruel, just done. As I wrote the storage details down, I had imagined a conversation they'd have when they realized the locks had changed. Their names weren't on anything, and the burden they had dismissed was gone, both from the house and from their control. I could see Blake's jaw tightening, Celeste's eyes flashing the way they did when she didn't get her way. But this time there'd be no argument to win, no plea to make. The decision had been made, and I'd made it alone. Before bed, I poured myself a small glass of Isabel's favorite wine, the one I'd been saving for something special. I held it up toward her photo on the dresser. "It's done, Isabel," I said quietly. "They'll never own what we built." Then I drank, not to the victory but to the peace I knew was finally within reach. Tomorrow, the papers would be filed with the county, the transfer recorded, and the house officially out of my name. And while they would see it as the ultimate betrayal, I saw it for what it really was, self-preservation. They would never see this sale coming. But I had seen it coming for months, maybe even years. All I had needed was the right moment, and I had taken it. The moment finally came on a brisk Thursday afternoon. I had been watching the clock all day, knowing Celeste and Blake's flight from San Diego would land around 3. By 4:30, the security camera feed on my phone lit up. Motion detected at the front door of the house they believed was still theirs. Blake's SUV rolled into the driveway, dust from the road clinging to the black paint. Celeste stepped out first, adjusting her sunglasses and looking up at the bay window as if she owned it. Blake followed, stretching like a man returning to familiar territory. Their body language screamed entitlement. Celeste fished her keys from her purse, chatting casually with Blake, and inserted one into the lock. It didn't turn. She jiggled it, frowned, and tried again. Blake stepped closer, his brow furrowing. "Let me try the back door," he muttered, already walking away. The camera caught him reappearing a few minutes later, irritation written all over his face. "Back door's locked too, and the garage opener's dead." He glanced at the keypad. "These are brand new locks." Celeste looked confused. That's impossible. Elias wouldn't even know who to call for something like that. She pulled out her phone and dialed my old landline. I knew it wouldn't connect. I'd had it disconnected weeks earlier. After a few rings, she snapped the phone shut. No answer. It's not even going to voicemail. They walked around to the side of the house and disappeared from the camera's view. A minute later, the feed showed Celeste climbing awkwardly through the kitchen window I'd left unlatched just for them. She vanished inside, then reappeared at the front door, letting Blake in. That's when they saw it. An envelope taped right at eye level, their names written in my precise engineer's handwriting. Celeste pulled it down, her hands trembling. Blake stood close, reading over her shoulder as her eyes scanned the words. I could see the shift in their expressions, confusion melting into shock, then disbelief, then something darker. She gasped. He sold the house. Her voice cracked. For $890,000. Cash. Blake snatched the letter, reading it like he could will the words to change. His face tightened, the charm gone. That manipulative old man was playing us the whole time. Celeste's voice rose to a near shriek. He kept all of it. That money was supposed to be our future. Blake rounded on her. Your future? You're the one who couldn't keep your mouth shut about him being a burden. You're the one who thought this would be easy. My fault, she snapped back. You're the one who said a nursing home was the only option. You're the one who wanted this house for yourself. Well, we had a plan, and now, thanks to your father's little stunt, we're homeless. Blake's voice was shaking now, not with anger, but with the fear of someone whose schemes have just collapsed. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were standing in my living room arguing about being homeless after planning to make me homeless. Celeste's voice dropped to a desperate pitch. We can call a lawyer. There has to be something we can do. With what money? Blake barked. I don't have a job, and your salary barely covers the cars. That's when the mask fully slipped. The marriage, the partnership, the shared schemes, it all crumbled right there on my feed. The way they blamed each other told me everything I needed to know. They'd only been united in one thing, getting me out. I let them argue for a few more minutes before closing the app. I didn't need to see the rest. The point had been made. I had my closure. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. Dad, we need to talk. Please. I didn't reply. I powered the phone off and poured myself a glass of the Bordeaux Isabelle, and I had been saving for a special occasion. It tasted like victory and finality. I walked to the window of my apartment, looking out at the Denver skyline glowing under the setting sun. Somewhere across the city, Celeste and Blake were realizing the depth of their mistake. Somewhere, they were beginning to understand that the man they thought was too old, too soft, and too grateful to fight back had outplayed them entirely. I raised my glass to the memory of my wife. To you, Isabel, justice served. The words felt right, like the last page of a long chapter finally closing. I wasn't celebrating their downfall as much as I was honoring my own freedom. For the first time in years, I felt weightless. The house was gone. The constant tension was gone. And in their place stood something I hadn't felt since before Isabel passed. Control. My life was mine again, my choices, my terms, my future, and I knew deep down that I would never ever let anyone make me a guest in my own life again. The morning after the confrontation felt strangely quiet, not just in my apartment, but inside my own head. For months, my thoughts had been tangled with what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. Now, there was space. Space to think, space to breathe, space to simply exist without the constant hum of anxiety. I made coffee the way Isabel used to, 2 scoops, a pinch of cinnamon, and stood at my small kitchen counter watching the steam curl into the air. It wasn't the same kitchen we'd shared for decades, but for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was trespassing in it. I decided I wasn't going to spend my days hiding behind curtains or nursing grudges. I had nearly $900,000 in the bank, and, more importantly, a clean slate. That kind of freedom is rare at my age. Most people in their 70s are counting down their years. I felt like I'd been handed a bonus round. I opened a notebook and started writing, not lists of bills or repair projects, but plans, ideas, things I'd told myself I'd get to someday when life was less hectic. Well, someday had arrived. First on the list was travel. Isabel and I had always dreamed of visiting the Pacific Northwest together. She wanted to see the rocky Oregon coastline and smell the cedar forests after rain. I couldn't take her with me physically, but I could take her in spirit. I booked a 2-week trip for the following month. No tours, no rushed schedules. Just me, a rented car, and the freedom to stop anywhere that caught my eye. The second thing on the list was reconnecting. I'd let too many friendships drift into nothing more than Christmas cards and the occasional forwarded email. I called Victor first. When he picked up, I didn't waste time. "Lunch is on me," I told him. "Name the place." He laughed, but there was a softness in his voice when he said, "About time, Elias." The third thing wasn't about doing, it was about undoing. I'd spent years carrying weight that didn't belong to me. Guilt over not seeing Celeste's change in character sooner. Regret over every time I'd swallowed my pride to keep the peace. That baggage had no place in my new chapter. I wasn't erasing the past, but I was refusing to live under its shadow. I started walking more, nothing strenuous, just long loops around the neighborhood. The air felt different, without a deadline or a need to rush home before someone questioned where I'd been. Sometimes I'd stop at Brews and Views, the little coffee shop a few blocks away. Sarah, the barista with the purple-streaked hair, would smile and slide my mug across the counter before I'd even ordered. "You look lighter these days," she said one morning. She wasn't wrong. The funny thing about taking back your life is that it doesn't just change how you feel, it changes how people see you. Neighbors who barely nodded before now stopped to chat. The clerk at the grocery store remembered my name. Even my reflection in the bathroom mirror looked different, less tired, more present. About a week into this new rhythm, I got another text from Celeste. This time, it was longer. "Dad, I know you're angry. We need to talk. Please." I didn't reply. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I'd already had every conversation I needed to have, just not with her. The note on the door had been my last word. I wasn't going to reopen the wound. One evening, I sat on my small balcony with a glass of wine, the city lights stretching out below. I thought about the house, not with longing, but with gratitude. It had been the stage for my greatest joys and deepest losses. It had sheltered me, taught me, and in the end, it had freed me. Selling it wasn't the end of my story, it was the bridge to the next one. By the time my trip rolled around, I felt like a man already in motion. I packed light, slipped Isabel's favorite scarf into my bag, and boarded a flight to Portland. From there, I drove the winding roads along the coast, stopping at every overlook, every trailhead, every weathered little cafe with world-famous clam chowder. I watched the waves smash against black rocks and listened to the ocean roar like it had something important to say. And maybe it did. Maybe it was saying, "You made it. You're still here. Keep going." When I finally returned to Denver, I realized something important. My life didn't need to be rebuilt to its former size. It just needed to fit me now. My apartment was enough. My circle of friends was enough. My plans were mine alone. The absence of Celeste and Blake in my daily life wasn't a hole. It was space. Space for peace. Space for possibility. One night, as I was locking up before bed, I caught sight of Isabel's photo on the bookshelf. I lifted it and spoke out loud, as if she were in the room. "I did it, Isabel. I kept the promise. I took care of myself." Saying it out loud made it real. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just a new chapter. It was the one I was always meant to write. From here on out, my days belonged to me. My choices, my pace, my joy, my way. And that's a kind of wealth no one can measure. So that's how it happened. How I went from being treated like a burden in my own home to reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my freedom. It wasn't about the money, though having it means I can live on my terms. It was about proving, to them and to myself, that I was never as helpless as they believed. Every step I took, from the first quiet plan to the final locked door, was a step toward the life I have now. A life that belongs only to me. And I'll be honest with you, walking away wasn't easy. The house held decades of memories. My marriage, my daughter's childhood, my victories and losses were built into those walls. But I learned something in the process. Walls don't make a home. Respect does. Love does. And if you don't have those, then all you have is a building filled with ghosts. Now I wake up each day knowing my choices are mine. I'm not waiting for permission to live, and I'm not letting anyone else dictate what my future should look like. The peace that comes with that is worth more than any inheritance, any piece of property, or any approval I could have chased. So here's my question for you. What would you have done in my place? Would you have stayed and endured the disrespect, hoping things might change? Or would you have taken the risk, made the cut, and started over on your own terms? If you've ever faced a moment where you had to choose between comfort and self-respect, I want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments below. And while you're here, don't forget to like this video, share it with friends, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story. Because here, every tale is a reminder. Your life is yours to protect.